It's more than 3 years since Julian Assange took refuge inside the Ecuadorian embassy in London. The WikiLeaks founder was avoiding extradition to Sweden and ultimately deportation to America, where he fears he'll be sent to prison over the release of hundreds of thousands of secret US government cables. Until this week, there's been a permanent British police guard outside the Ecuadorian embassy ready to arrest Julian Assange if he should try to leave. But the bobbies have now been withdrawn because of the expense, already racking up a bill of over £12 million. Now, the police will be relying on covert monitoring of the embassy instead. Inside, Julian Assange has kept himself busy commissioning a new book. It's called The WikiLeaks Files, The World According to the US Empire. It's a series of essays by 17 writers examining the impact of WikiLeaks on various countries. Julian Assange joins us from inside the Ecuadorian embassy. Julian Assange, welcome back to Breakfast.
G'day, Fran.
What's your response to the news first? I'll come to WikiLeaks in a moment, but that the police have been pulled from outside the embassy in London. Does that change the situation for you?
It doesn't. What has happened is they've exchanged their civilian... let's go back. What's happened is not quite what the media has reported. The police themselves have put out a statement. And in that statement, it says that they are going to a covert plan at the embassy. They are going to strengthen their covert plan at the embassy. Now, that's important because there has been a covert plan for a long time. The majority of expenditure has gone on covert operations, and they're going to strengthen those. What they have done is exchange the uniformed police for police without uniforms.
So you can see that.
Been done?
Yes, go on.
We can see that. Why has that been done? It has been done because the very visible presence of those police in front of the embassy has caused a variety of domestic problems here in the United Kingdom, and there's also a pending UN finding into the whole case. What are the domestic problems? Well, it has to do with cutbacks to the police services. So there's been quite a bit of debate within the London Assembly that how on earth can you spend £12.6 million, 26.5 million Australian dollars, on someone who hasn't even been charged with an offence.
Okay, but it's still not... you can't step outside without being nabbed.
Yeah, they have plainclothes police. They've also set up a network of surveillance cameras going back to their command centre around the embassy. Journalists should do some basic mathematics. £12.6 million over 3.3 years at a standard policeman's salary is 164 full-time equivalent police. Now, if you include overtime pay, you include more experienced police, etc., that's maybe half of that, so 76, even at a very conservative estimation of the number of police, and we see a lot of that. So this is a major operation. It's called a national security operation in terms of the internal literature and in the London Assembly. It's outrageous that is all spent on someone who hasn't even been charged with an offence in the UK or in any other country, and that's caused political problems here in the United Kingdom, and so the government is removing the visible evidence of that expenditure.
And I'll come back to the state of the play against you in a moment, but let's look at the WikiLeaks files now. Why the need for this book? What more could it add to what we already know about WikiLeaks and the cables which are there for anyone to read?
Yeah, so we started doing this book in 2011. It's 624 pages long. It's now the #1 bestseller at Foyles, which is the biggest bookstore here in London. Well, the reason for doing it is because other people were not doing it. We thought other people might do it, and in fact, it has been done to a degree in Latin America with a number of Spanish books coming out. There's a couple in Asian languages, but very strangely, not in English. And I wondered about that. I thought, well, surely academics would have made this book. That would be very natural. We have now 2.7 million cable corpus, more than 2 billion words, and this library of cables has been published, 500,000 this year. That is the largest library of information about how the US government works in terms of its foreign policy. And that is the corpus for foreign policy research, for international relations, and for international politics, in terms of primary source documentation. It's a gold mine for academics, but in English, especially in the United States, it doesn't form the basis of many academic papers in relation to international relations. Now, on other issues, it does. So in relation to conflict epidemiology, in relation to computational linguistics, there's lots of American journals and lots of American authors using our material, but not in international relations.
And what you say about that in your foreword is that newspapers and academics have missed the empire for its cables, too focused on individual cables and findings.
The newspapers have concentrated on individual cables and short stories, not looking at relationships and not looking at the strategic picture, but just looking at some little vignette. That's okay. That's very understandable. That's the kind of business that news is in. Academia is meant to tackle that. Academia didn't tackle that. The United States has a WikiLeaks problem, including U.S. academia. We track that down. There's actually policies we introduced in a number of the most prestigious foreign relations journals of never publishing anything from WikiLeaks that might be classified. And that's something that extended across a wide variety of U.S. departments, and it comes about as a result of an email from the White House issued to every single U.S. government employee and every single contractor, threatening them in relation to that. And then it's spread outside the government proper and its contracting services to universities, to think tanks, and so on.
So what does it find? What in these essays, in the WikiLeaks file, what do you find from these, I'm bamboozled by the numbers, but hundreds of thousands of cables? In your view, tell us about the US foreign policy then when you draw that together.
Well, it's hard. That's what the whole book is for, right? If we could just put it in a news story, we wouldn't have had this problem.
All right.
But if I can try from a very, very high level, what we find is the US is an empire. It is, of course, not a traditional empire like the Roman Empire or even the British Empire. It is a very modern form of empire, an empire based on trade and getting beneficial relationships in trade through coercive force, diplomatic institutions, other international institutions that it sets up, and dominance over information. So that's the basic takeaway. But then, of course, you need to look at each region to see what that interaction means. So we have a fascinating chapter, for example, on what is the triangle between US, South Korea, and Japan. How does that work? Similarly, in relation to US, Israel, and Turkey, and some other countries in the region, how does that work? And then, so each one of those, there's a regional story in each case. But we looked at, went beyond that, and looked at the International Criminal Court. Because at some stage I thought, well, yes, relationships between states is important and one of the key ways to describe the world, but a lot of the mediation between companies and people and states is now international institutions. And the ICC is a very interesting example because it's simple enough to understand. Its basic function to arrest people and prosecute them for serious war crimes and serious crimes against humanity is easy to understand. The results are easy to understand. Either it has prosecuted those people or it hasn't. And then we looked at how the US has tried to prevent the ICC from prosecuting any US government officials by engaging in negotiations with nearly every single country in the world to enter into what it calls Article 78 agreements, which are secret bilateral agreements with member countries of the ICC to never extradite a US government employee to the ICC. And that provides a window into seeing what pressures the United States brings to bear when it wants something. In this case, you've got people very close to the US administration exercising their influence over the US State Department as its diplomatic vehicle to try and insulate them from prosecutions in relation to the Iraq War, in relation to CIA renditions.
Okay, it's 7:45 on Breakfast. Our guest is Julian Assange. He's calling us online from the Ecuadorian Embassy in London. That brings us closer to your situation, away from the WikiLeaks file, because you are there taking refuge because you say if you're extradited to Sweden, Sweden might do the bidding of the US government and send you over to the US where you'll be locked up.
Well, I have to correct you there, Fran. There's been a lot of misinformation in the media. It's extremely irritating. It's mostly because the media about this situation is mediated through London. And obviously the London tabloids and other London newspapers, BBC as a state broadcaster, has a certain interest in this situation or a certain angle on this situation. So I've been granted, I applied for, granted and won political asylum in relation to the ongoing pending prosecution in the United States, which the US government admits in its court filings. It's in a judgment from this year. So I won that case. The British government refuses to say whether it has already received a US extradition order into the United Kingdom. There is also an additional possibility that if I accepted an extradition to Sweden, although I haven't been charged, that I could also be onwards extradited from Sweden. So there's a risk of extradition from the UK or from Sweden to the United States, where there is a very serious pending prosecution for espionage.
And there's also a serious allegation of sexual assault against you in Sweden. 2 have dropped off in recent times because their questioning didn't occur in time. But there are reports now...
I have to correct you, Fran. There is no serious allegation.
There is an allegation of rape.
The woman concerned... No, you've got to talk about allegations and allegations. Within Sweden, I have already been cleared. The most senior prosecutor of Stockholm made a finding that no crime had been committed. The case was then resurrected by a politician, Claes Borgström, after that finding, in the context of his ongoing WikiLeaks dispute with the United States.
As it stands now, though, the Swedish...
It is now and still a, quote, preliminary investigation, unquote, which has not moved in 5 years, and which even the Swedish courts say that prosecutor has breached her duty in the handling of the case.
All right.
The woman concerned says not only was she not raped, but the police made it up. That's what the woman herself says in records that are held not by me, but by the police.
All right, so where does this stand now? Because the prosecutor, the Swedish officials are being quoted as saying they are optimistic about reaching an agreement with the Ecuadorian government that could pave the way for questioning you in London, finally. Are plans underway for that?
There's negotiations between Ecuador and Sweden. In the end, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't address the situation with the US extradition. It doesn't address the situation with the British saying that regardless of what happens in Sweden, they'll arrest me anyway.
So what does change this situation? At what point, you can't stay in there forever, how does this end? Do you have to do as Edward Snowden has done and offer to go to prison in America?
It's a political situation. It's a matter of politics. Domestically, as we've seen, the politics is shifting. People can see that this is an unjust situation. A law last year was passed to ban further extraditions without charge from this country last year as a result of this situation. So people are seeing it as an unjust situation. As a result, the government is responding to hide the visibility of the situation in relation to having very visible police presence in the front of the building. But, this inquiry by the UN into the situation will produce a result, hopefully this year, that once again will change and shape the politics of the situation. Okay. But I think as time has gone by, the situation is simplified in that we now have a judgment in US federal court in DC about the prosecution in the United States. We know the charge types: espionage, conspiracy to commit espionage, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, general conspiracy, etc., which are applied to me and this organization. That's completely clear. That is completely undeniable. It's in a federal court judge states it. Warrants to Google state it. So we should not have any of this beating around the bush that we had Carr doing, for example, when he was Foreign Minister. It's well established and undeniable.
Okay.
Similarly, the United Kingdom says that it will arrest regardless of what happens in Sweden. And Sweden, we have what is an obviously extremely corrupt case, drawing the attention of the Swedish judiciary and the Swedish media. So I think we're in a simplifying position politically, and those people that have supported this persecution of WikiLeaks in a variety of ways will pay the price.
Julian Assange, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Fran. Bye.
Julian Assange joining us from within the Ecuadorian Embassy in London, and his new book is called The WikiLeaks Files, The World According to the US Empire. It's out now, published by Verso. It's 9 minutes to 8 on Breakfast.